As you can see today, we'll be talking about how to adapt your communication style for diverse teams. This is a topic which is becoming more and more critical and important to my clients that I work with, as sometimes the teams have expanded due to corporate changes. There's been a lot of those recently. Companies expand, or perhaps it's your first time in leadership and you're working with people from different backgrounds and cultures, and you're noticing some characteristics in your team that you need to become more aware of. So great to be here, and I think just a minute early I'm going to get started. If you feel comfortable putting where you're from in the chat, that would be most welcome. So I'm going to be covering today leadership communications and how we can work better with diverse teams. As I mentioned, it's becoming much more of a popular topic with many of my clients because very often there's a lot of corporate changes, teams merged, organisations restructure, and that means we have to really dig deep into our leadership styles and think about how we can flex and adapt to different cultures. I am recording the session, so you'll get a copy of the recording afterwards, and as a thank you for registering, you'll also get a free checklist. So look out for that afterwards. If you have any comments or any questions, do feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll get to those as soon as I can. I've also put my contact details in the chat. If there's something specific that's worrying you or on your mind or you'd like to discuss in confidence, then feel free to get in touch. If you go to my website, there's an option to book a call. So let's get started about this hugely popular topic. How do we lead today with diverse teams? What's important and what are some of the issues that I see with my clients and how have I helped them? So there's a lot of things going on when we're trying to manage teams, and I just want to say from the outset that I understand that managing or leading a team in today's world is very, very challenging, particularly in today's climate. What I'm sensing is that my clients are having increased scopes of role, that perhaps resources and time can be very critical, very tight, and as leaders, it sometimes feels like we have to do everything, we have to know everything. So I'm going to break this down for you and give you some guidance and some tips around some of the issues I see and how you can really break it down and learn to really lead effectively, to bring your team together for performance, to help you influence across the organisation, to help you with your career satisfaction. Now, these are some of the issues that I see with my clients. And this isn't about blaming, it's just my observations of some of the areas that I see. Sometimes I see that when leaders have challenges, managers or leaders, that sometimes we can be tempted to use a one-size-fits-all style of communication. And you may be coming to your leadership career with completely the right ethics and values. However, perhaps you haven't had the direction or support to learn how to adapt your style and how to flex your style according to the people you're working with. And you might have a very, very diverse group of employees from different cultural backgrounds and geographies. Now, I can relate to this because I spent quite a bit of time leading in the NHS, which I thoroughly enjoyed, thoroughly rewarding. But I came from a private sector background. I knew that I wanted to encourage my teams and help them to grow and develop. But sometimes I was using a one-size-fits-all style to leadership and I needed to adapt. So that was a really great lesson for me, and I see this with my clients. Sometimes perhaps we feel as leaders we need to know all the answers. It can be quite a lonely place being a leader. It can be quite isolating, particularly if you're busy and resources are constrained, your own manager's constrained, HR are constrained. And sometimes we can get into that mode of doing leadership rather than being a leader, focusing on people. And sometimes we might forget to solicit feedback because I bet your bottom dollar a lot of your team have the answers to your challenges already, how to work with them, how to approach different cultural sensitivities, for example. Sometimes I see that we can often forget, particularly if we're under pressure or we're busy, that perhaps we don't listen. Now, there's listening and listening. I'm talking about attentive, focused, conscious listening. And sometimes we can interrupt people. And in many cultures, that's not seen as a very good attribute, a very positive attribute. And generally in leadership, it's something we all need to work on. We forget to ask questions along with the feedback. We forget to ask questions. Sometimes we might be a bit scared to ask questions. Am I saying the right thing? Am I saying the wrong thing? But we can ask questions. We can do that in a team workshop setting or on a one-to-one basis. How would you prefer me to communicate with you? And of course, it's ideal if our employees, our team, ask us those questions as well, so we can get to a consensus. But there's nothing wrong in asking those questions as a leader, because that demonstrates that you're interested in your team and how they like to work together, how you all like to work together. And sometimes we can be a bit scared of conflict, difficult conversations. We're not used to having these conversations about how do I work and bring together a very diverse background of people? How do I manage this? How do I even approach it? So sometimes we might shy away from it because we're worried about those difficult conversations, but actually by not having those conversations, it can actually lead to conflict. So moving on, just a brief bit of information about myself. I'm an international speaker. I run workshops. I've been a coach for over 10 years, and that's based on a background of 25 years plus in corporate life. My background was communications, but in the more traditional sense, public relations, government affairs. So a lot about influencing, working with different audiences. And I think that's really helped me with my coaching. I was also involved in crisis management. So finding solutions and keeping cool in a crisis also lends itself to coaching, because sometimes my clients come to me very confused and very unhappy, and it's my job to move them forward, get that clarity and get to where they want to be much quicker than trying to figure it out by yourself. It's sometimes difficult to do that when you're stuck in your own echo chamber or mindset. I use psychological tools and techniques, and I've studied those over the years. I continue to study and grow and learn new skills such as neurodiversity, such as conscious leadership, and many client successes in the field of communications, conflict management, team coaching. Anyway, enough of that. So let's ask ourselves these questions. And if you have other questions or concerns on your mind, please feel free to put them in the chat. But if your communication style isn't quite where it needs to be, and again, these are observations, things that I've seen with my client. Leadership is an evolving practice as the world changes. We're living in a very changeable, volatile world. But some of these questions might resonate with you. Why are we missing deadlines and project goals? Why aren't my team speaking up? They seem demotivated. They're not as, I don't know, enthusiastic as they were before. There seems to be low morale. I'm getting a lot of pushback. I'm getting a lot of resistance. It feels like there's conflict. Beneath all of these questions, there are answers, and it's my job to help my clients get to these answers. Now, let's have a look at the cost of leadership communications, or a lack of overall good leadership. Healthy leadership communications can cost an organization. As you can see here from the numbers, it's significant. Now, these are US numbers. There are also UK numbers. If anyone's interested, please contact me. But 88% of leaders themselves and 63% of employees wish their company and their leaders communicated better, their senior leadership. And poor communication can cost a lot of money. It can cost over $12,000 in this instance per employee, and it can cost 1.2 trillion annually. Now, you might be thinking, how can that be the case? Well, as you can see from the results below of poor leadership communications, these are just some of the issues that pop up. Absenteeism, stress, loss of team members. It costs a lot of money to replace a team member, and that team member may just have an area that they're not happy with that could be discussed, could be developed, could be grown. Grievances and lawsuits in the worst cases, misunderstandings, and that low morale causing teams to sort of spend time in conflict, shutting down, not really adding to the contribution of where the company should be going, where your team should be going to meet your business objectives. So it does have a serious impact on business. Now, this is what I notice, as I mentioned before, one size fits all style of communications. Now, I've learnt this myself when I was leading teams, that I was coming from the right place, but I needed to round out and build my leadership style. Now, I had to do that by myself because when I was leading, there wasn't as much support in terms of coaching, development. It's not like it is today. The help is there for you today to really think about your style. And I'll be going into a process that will help you break this down, not including the team in discussions or agreeing how you operate as a team, especially when it comes to matters of diversity. Now, these are some of the key issues I've seen. If you've seen anything else, I'd love to see it in the chat. I know when I'm speaking to my clients, it can be that they're working in a region of the world where there might be some conflict going on at the moment. And obviously, that's a very sensitive topic, not just for you as a leader, but for the whole organization. And I've worked with clients to help them really address those issues in a sensitive manner, in an inclusive manner. So, these are some tips that I can give you immediately to help you start thinking about how to become a better communicator as a leader or a manager to help you bring together your team. Now, these may seem obvious, but as leaders, when we're busy, sometimes we're busy doing, rather than focusing on people. A big part of leadership should really be about looking after your people. And that doesn't mean telling people what to do always. It might do with more junior teams, more direction, but actually it's about galvanizing the team together, being better together. It happens to be that you're a leader because of your experience of the industry, of the sector, your expertise, and that's probably what got you there to this position in the first place, this leadership or managerial position. But actually, we need to look at leadership in a different way. It's constantly evolving, and we need to grow with it. It's not about imposing, it's about bringing people together, giving them an environment where people feel seen, heard, listened to, and psychologically safe. I think Google did a survey quite a few years ago now with their employees, and the number one sort of attribute that came up for good leadership, a good culture, diversity, inclusion was actually feeling psychologically safe. Now, we might not think of it as being psychologically safe, but if we're being ignored, if we're being spoken over, if we're not being listened to, if we are not getting the feedback or the development we need, if there are corporate changes going on that really confuse us, this can cause us as human beings to feel very, very unsafe on a deep subconscious level. You might not be able to put your finger on it, but it's a feeling sometimes, or you might even verbalize it. So it's really important that as a leader, we realize we're here to bring people together, to move together, and you don't need to know all the answers. So here are some hints and tips for you about what leaders do to really become more diverse, more inclusive in the way that they're leading teams. So, for example, I know sometimes resources are constrained, but how can you be visible in front of your team? What channels can you use? If you have teams in a certain geography, could you do something such as a video that would work for them in their region that's specific to them? Have you got the budget for you all to get together? I've worked with leaders who are managing teams in the Middle East, in Africa, in Europe, huge teams. How can you get together? Is there a company meeting, for example, where you can pin on a team workshop during some part of that work, of that overall meeting, to get together and talk about how you work together as a team? It's about the language you use, the body language. In certain cultures, certain body language does not work well. In certain cultures, being very direct will work well. It's about reading the room and asking people if you're not sure, observing, listening. Now, we need to have curiosity to work together and understand each other on a regular basis. And not doing this will really cost you great team members. It will cost you time, money, energy, and resources. So, how do I help my clients to do this? I usually pull together tailored programs because for me, whilst you might have some fantastic programs internally around diversity, around inclusion, sometimes there's very specific nuances depending on the industry, the location of your team, the size of your team, where you are in your leadership journey, the particular conflicts or changes that might be going on in the organisation that has brought all of these issues to the surface. So I really like to work with understanding specific problems, a situational analysis, if you like, a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths of the team, the weaknesses, opportunities and threats? And sometimes this isn't just doing this with the leader, but doing it with the team, because sometimes when you bring somebody in from outside the organisation, it can really help to create a safer environment for people to feed back. And in certain instances, if I'm doing feedback sessions with certain parts of the team, the leader won't be involved, because then the team feels really at liberty to express how they feel. I identify, if I'm working with you as a leader, your typical approach, and I have tests, psychologically based tests to diagnose your leadership and communication style. What are your fears? What are you concerned about? So I really get to the bottom of what's the current situation. And then we build a plan of action to upskill you in communications or influencing, and then we engage the team. Now, all of these things might be happening in parallel, and I can talk to that process in a minute. I like to break my work down into 3 key steps: diagnosing, planning, and then growing. And I'm going to go into these steps now. Diagnose, step 1. Now, we've talked about some of those root cause problems, and maybe some of these sound familiar to you. I know that they sound familiar to me looking back at my leadership history. Maybe you've tried different approaches and it just hasn't worked. You've changed your communication style. It's still not working. My question would be, if it's one team member or the whole team that you're noticing some symptoms, are we really understanding the root causes? If this sounds familiar, or you've tried this approach, you've tried different approaches, but it hasn't really borne the success, just put a yes in the chat box so I can see what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you. Sometimes we can feel a bit confused. We're trying all these different things and they're not working, but are we making assumptions about the problems? Very often in coaching and in business in general, I quite often see people solving the wrong problems, and that might be a team problem, and it might be a very easy fix, or it might be a specific problem with 1 or 2 individuals in a certain geography. I read a statistic that actually showed that 90%, 97% of an organization's problems aren't understood by the leadership team. Now, that's not to criticize leaders. They're busy, they've got a lot on, they might be dealing with shareholders, but the majority of problems and issues are understood by your team. Have they got a voice to raise those concerns? It can take a lot of time and a lot of energy. And if we don't resolve these issues, it decreases performance, motivation, and is quite draining, quite frankly, for you as a leader. Now, questions we might want to ask ourselves leading on from this last point. And I've got an example here of somebody that I work with to really identify some issues that were going on within the team. Have you identified what are the underlying issues? Are we making superficial assumptions based on our view of the world? What strategies are you using? Are they working? Have you got an idea of what your typical style of communications as a leader is? Have you thought about what is the other person's style of communication if you're working in a very diverse team? This is super important. Some people will have a very direct style of communications. Some people will be very expressive and use their arms and express and have a lot of ideas. Other people will be very reserved, a lot more introvert, and more process driven, and everything in between. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just sometimes we need to blend our styles and learn new skills to really enhance the performance of our team, enhance the cohesion with the rest of the team. So I was working with a team recently, a global medical team, and they were from different parts of Europe. There was a mixture of people who were very direct, very happy to speak about how frustrated they were. But one of the leaders was very reserved, didn't want to address the stress in the room, wanted to take it on for himself because he was very loyal. He was very supportive as a leader, which is great. But if you're absorbing those problems and working extra hard to solve them, we're not really involving the rest of the team. So conflict arose. It was affecting their internal reputation. They were missing milestones. They were working in medical, so safety is key, being on top of those areas and the processes. They had a very small HR team that couldn't really afford the time to help them. There weren't really the internal resources to diagnose, assess, plan, and act on these specific problems. And within a matter of weeks, I worked with them to create an understanding of the leaders' communication style, their own styles, how those styles came into conflict. We talked about cultural norms because they were from different parts of Europe. Europe is not just one country, it's many, many different countries with different specifics, and felt they weren't being listened to. Some of them were being very vocal about their stresses and felt they weren't being listened to because the team leader was a bit reticent to be faced with that direct communication instead of being able to adapt his style. And that's not to blame, it's just about learning and growth and development. Interviews with team members, a cultural map for the team, a SWOT analysis, reverse feedback sessions at the right time with different leaders in the medical team to really give that feedback in a safe environment, which I moderated. And we had a team workshop, and together we created an action plan. How do we communicate together? How do I like to be communicated with? What rubs me up the wrong way? What works in my culture? What are the cultural norms that are important for me in my location? And as a result of that, making great progress. Their reputation as a team has gone through the roof because they're pulling together and they're working together. But the diagnosis and the feedback at the beginning to solve the right problems was absolutely key. So just to remind you, diagnose, plan, and grow, the 3 key steps to break it down for you. Now, another team, Steve, again in biopharma. Actually, this is the medical team that I was talking about before, but he realised that what he'd done so far hadn't worked. He was at his wit's end, a very charming, engaging leader, but hadn't really seen this level of conflict before. And he realised it would have snowballed and got worse. It could have led to situations with HR. Some of the teams were on the brink of burnout because they weren't feeling listened to or included. And that wasn't because anyone in that room was a bad person. It was just about understanding the underlying causes and spending time together as a team, not just doing, but being together to make that plan of action come together and to learn new skills. Excuse me. Oops. There you go. Next slide. Got a jumpy mouse today. Anyway, here's some examples of some of the people that I've worked with where they were facing a lot of stress, they were burning out, they were working with teams where they felt their leadership approach wasn't working. So just to show you that I've worked with people across many, many different cultures and teams. I'm working with a team in the Middle East and North Africa at the moment, and I'm adapting my style as a workshop leader to really work with them. For example, in some cultures, they won't always put their cameras on early on in a workshop, and I've learned a way in which to encourage that and really bring people out to be more bold in the way that they're communicating. So just some examples there for you. So just to remind you, I've put my contact details in the chat, and if you would like to, I'm offering some free consultations, and they're confidential. We'll identify your gaps on that call, your challenges, and identify where you need help. And I'll give you some objective guidance. It's not based on my advice, my view of the world, but on the skills and the tools that I've learned over the 10 years that I've been coaching, the work that I've done with my clients. And not only does it help your professional life, it helps your personal life. So there's the link there for the call, but let's carry on. Diagnosis. Understanding the root causes, making life easier for yourself, letting go of that need to know all the answers as a leader. I always say, do what you always do, get what you always get. Leadership communications is not just about telling people what to do. It's about those micro day-to-day interactions. It's about coming together as a team. And I think in today's world, we do not spend enough time doing that. We very much focus on activities rather than how are we doing as a team? What needs to change? What are our goals looking like? That alignment around the vision so you can execute properly and you can execute on time. I really feel that leadership is a mindset. It's a privilege to lead a team. I know sometimes it's hard work. I know it's challenging, but you're in a position where you can really help shape somebody's life and career and experience. And I think, wouldn't we all want to do that? Step two, planning. I talked about the 3 steps. We're on step 2. Diagnose, plan, step 2, and then grow. We need to have a plan in place. Now you understand the root causes. Perhaps you've already got some feedback. Perhaps we've done that report about your communication style and leadership style. What's next? What's your end goal? What's the end goal of your colleague or colleagues? Do you know what it is? Do you know what your team wants from you? And how do we consciously move to a solution? Most people try and fix the wrong problem, but we need to have that unique understanding of the characteristics. This can result in fatigue and frustration if we don't diagnose this properly, the diagnosis phase. Nothing gets resolved and it perpetuates, and people try and rush this phase. What we need to do is have some structure and direction to create a plan that really covers how to communicate effectively, how to build in inclusion, fairness and consistency in our leadership communications. How do I really communicate in this culture? How can I be fair and consistent in terms of how I show up as a leader, but inclusive in a team that's very, very diverse? How can I continue to get feedback from my team? And what's my team roadmap, starting with this plan that gets you from where you are now to a much healthier position where you're all pulling together in the same direction? It allows you to uncover other issues and facts, create solutions. Having a plan for your team. We have a plan for everything else. I see plans for performance reviews, talent development, but how much time do we spend with our team thinking about diversity in action? We often see policies. There's some great training programs internally, but how do we plan to bring that into our team? How often do we get together as a team? What do we need to discuss? How can we avoid that resentment and bitterness where we're not including people? How do we stop minimizing disruption, a loss of performance and productivity? How do we minimize the escalation? Don't we all want this from our teams? And the clue is, after diagnosis, is having a clear roadmap and plan. And actually, I would suggest to you getting your team involved in that planning and that roadmap. Now, not everybody will speak up. Some people are more reserved, more hesitant to speak up. They might be reflective thinkers, so you need to cater and include different thinking styles as well as culture, different personality styles, but find a way of embracing your team and really helping them to progress, helping yourself to progress, minimizing stress by getting them involved in having a plan that really works to address some of these issues. Talked about diagnosis, then the plan is setting the goals. Once we've got that, how do we set the goals as a team? Those might be goals around specific business objectives, but how we communicate. We don't spend long enough on it. How do we communicate? Who leads the meetings? Where do we have our meetings? How visible am I as a leader? How much visibility am I giving to my team? What are some of the cultural norms that exist in other cultures? How do I deal with and build relationships, not just with my team members that are overseas from where I am, but their leaders locally? Because quite often what I see is if you're working in a very diverse organisation, for example, I'm working with an organisation that looks after clinical trials logistics, super important, super safety driven, a high level of compliance. But in some of the markets, how do we really bring together the global ethics of the company and how we operate and bring those locally as well? And sometimes the key to that is having not just a good relationship with your team member, but the local management as well. And to do that, you've got to understand how organizations locally operate. What are some of the cultures? How does that align with a global culture? How are we going to facilitate open communication and ongoing feedback as part of this plan? How are we going to learn from communications failures as part of this plan? How are you, as the leader, going to lead as a role model? What is your leadership style? We've got that, we've understood it, we've diagnosed it. What changes does that mean for you? Not radical changes overnight, but bit by bit, how do you grow and develop as a leader? How do we find solutions and move to any resolutions we need to make and move to a high performing team? The third step is grow. For you as a leader, and as you grow as a leader, guess what? Your team grows. If you go through this exercise of diagnosing, planning, and then growing together, it will have knock-on effects for your team and you will become that role model. And also, it's about learning from your team. As a leader, you grow when you learn from your team. It's not one-way traffic. People today expect to be able to give feedback. They might be more reserved and do it in a one-to-one setting, in a more analytical way, or they might be very verbal and very passionate in meetings. Sometimes that's about personality styles or behaviours at work. Sometimes it's about culture. Sometimes it's about both. So you need to be bearing that in mind, but you will learn as a leader if you go through this process. You will grow, and that's only going to help you in your leadership career. If you want to work in different locations, if you want to move to a sector, if you want to really grow your career and your career satisfaction. So this is the third step. Okay, so these are some of the issues that we talked about before. General training courses, not diagnosing the issues, being resistant to change. I know I should be able to fix this all by myself. This isn't true. As leaders, we're all work in progress, and sometimes we just need to be able to get our ego out of the way. And sometimes we also have competing priorities. So as a leader, you might be fixated on, I've got to deliver this strategy, this objective, this goal. And what we need to realize is that we need to delegate sometimes, because for us as leaders, it's about the people we work with, creating that safe space, creating that harmony, really understanding what is going on in the different geographies in which you're leading. Are there situations going on there that's difficult for the team? Do people in those areas need support? How do I use my body language and my non-verbal cues with somebody in front of me? Or what are the cultural norms in some geographies? For example, I've done a lot of work in Belgium and Sweden, and being punctual is super important. Now, to other cultures, that's not so important. And there's a level of politeness in certain geographies where it can seem as though other people are very, very reserved and not saying much. But after a while, that in the meeting, that can break down and that cohesion can really exist. And having worked with lots of leaders, I can really recognise when people are used to working in different cultures or have learned how to do so, how to adapt, and how to flex their leadership style, which is critical. Flexibility and adaptability are key in this. And those that perhaps have a little way to go. And we're always learning. I'm always learning as the world changes. So we must listen as well. That's aligned to some of the tips that I put in the beginning of the presentation of this workshop today. We must listen, but actively listen, not listening to give an answer, to rush anything, but to really, really understand what's being said and not being said. And I have got a tool that also helps people to identify their listening styles, because guess what? There's more than one listening style and there's more than one listening approach, depending on what you're trying to achieve or work together on in that dynamic, in that conversation. So you need the diagnosis step to get to the plan phase, and then we're on to the grow phase. What does the grow phase mean? Once we've diagnosed the issues, through that, you will be learning. You will be absolutely learning about what your team finds important, what you need to develop, some of the tools, communications tools you need to use, some specific changes you may need to make to your leadership style, certain perhaps visibility issues or challenges that are going on in certain locations that your team haven't feel comfortable to broach with you, perhaps because of they're scared of speaking up, they're more reserved, whatever the answer is. You'll understand all of this in this growth diagnosis phase, and it's fascinating. I see my clients and the light bulbs are popping off. I can see it as in, oh, I thought that was the right thing to do. Perhaps I need to adapt my style. Perhaps I need to adapt my tone of voice. Perhaps I need to speak at a different cadence, in a different speed, in a different way. Perhaps I haven't asked enough questions, and it doesn't make you a bad person. This is all about growth and development. And sometimes we're so busy as leaders, we don't get time to stop and think about these things. So diagnosis, absolutely. There will be light bulbs. I hope this translates as a phrase, light bulbs and ideas going off, realizations about, aha, so for me, this is what I need to adapt. And if you're doing this for your whole team with the profiling and the tools that I use, you'll get a really good snapshot of how your team is aligned. We can align that to cultural norms and then almost plot it out on a map. Where are the gaps? It's a gap analysis. Where are the gaps? Where do we need to improve? And of course, we can do that with the team around the feedback sessions, the reverse mentoring, the reverse coaching to you as a leader, if you're open for that. Some of the sessions that I run, that diagnosis and then stepping into the plan will be absolutely a major source of growth for you. And it will run in parallel. These aren't lateral steps. Okay, so we might start with diagnosis, but as you're diagnosing and understanding what's going on both for you and building your team map, then you will grow. You will grow. It's not as though one follows the other. You will grow, and it will inform the plan that we talked about. That plan that over weeks we can start to diagnose. We can build in the plan of how do we tackle these areas. Is it workshops? Is it a team workshop? Is it some small one-to-ones? That's what I can help you with, making sure it's tailored to your needs and discussing it with your team, with somebody objective like myself. So these aren't 1, 2, 3, although they're written as such, but you will grow along the way as long as you're open to feedback and you have an open mindset and you're going into your leadership career with the right values and attributes, which I'm sure you are, because otherwise you wouldn't be here today. And these are some of the benefits that you will gain from going through a program like this. And this is just some of the ones I can think of. You're likely to minimize attrition, conflict. You'll grow in terms of your self-awareness, your flexibility, your adaptability, your ability to problem solve. And it won't just be you growing, because we'll be doing this with your team. Now, I can work with the individual leader, but if we're working with the team, I've seen it before where teams just come together and understand, oh, I didn't realize that about you. I made an assumption. So these are just some of the benefits that you can experience. Remember, leadership, oh, this looks like a tired leader. It's not about doing all the time. It's about being. Now, if we think about human beings, some of us are more introvert, some of us are more extrovert, but as a general rule, we like to be around people that make us feel good, right? We don't want to be around those people that I call the drainers or the sinkholes. We want to be around the people that engage and inspire us. Yes, we can all have a bad day. We can all be tired. But this is about you, how you are as a leader rather than what you do. Of course, you have to hit business goals. Of course, you have to meet deadlines. But your job is to oversee them. But your job is to build a culture, to build a community, build a team that works together across boundaries, to include people, to understand how they work, to put yourself in those other person's shoes. So you're starting from the inside out. You're really understanding your own style and then bringing everyone together. You can only lead others when you lead yourself. And when we're with people that engage us, that communicate well with us, they might make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We're not robots. It builds that serotonin, which is our happiness hormone. Have you ever been in a situation where you've come out of a meeting and you just feel like this person on the slide? Or have you come out of a meeting where you might have even discussed something that was challenging, but you felt uplifted, you felt listened to? That's because of serotonin. How would you like to be treated? What do you know about the person in front of you? What are they going through at the moment? What are some of their cultural norms? How do they like to communicate? What are their specific working hours? What are some of their public holidays, for example, that you can celebrate and bring into your team to make sure it is inclusive? All of those things build the happiness hormone, and you can still grow and learn to be a winning team if you face these challenges together and include the team, whilst recognizing that people do have their different styles, and you will need specific, flexible, adaptable listening and communication skills to do this. Let's face it, leadership is all about communication. I think life is about communication. So with leadership, I just feel you could have two words. It could all be one word together: leadership, communications, because leading is about communicating, whether that's upwards, whether that's with your team, whether that's dealing with conflict. So sometimes these are some of the challenges that we can face, that when we're going into that planning phase, these are some of the areas that we really want to uncover. We want to identify conscious behaviours and cultural preferences and the unconscious, subconscious behaviours. We want to encourage that two-way feedback. We want to understand that things change in the world and we need to change with them. So we've talked about the 3 steps. We're going to diagnose what the issues are, diagnose the styles of the team. We're going to conduct some feedback sessions in whichever way works for you, be that a survey, whether that be facilitated sessions. I do this all the time in my leadership development programs. I get feedback from people. We talk together, we diagnose it, and then we plan. What does that plan look like? And it might be very unique for each situation. It might be as simple as a team workshop and then having some regular workshops. It might be a leadership communications plan. It might be having your team personality, workplace behavior, disc profiles all together on a dashboard so you can see them. It might be having that cultural map aligned to personality styles, so you've got almost like a grid of understanding where people sit and where you might need to bring in more diverse talent, more diverse team members. And I've got a lot of blogs on my website which cover this topic. And when you have a more inclusive and diverse team, guess what? You're more successful. Studies show it time and time again, because what you're doing is reflecting the world in which you are operating. Your organisation is a citizen of the world, and we need to understand the world and the communities in which we're operating and reflect it. And the organizations that do that consciously, the leaders that do that consciously and adapt, they absolutely outperform other companies. Remember that these are some of the areas that you might have tried that haven't really worked, ignoring it, one size fits all. And this isn't about blame. I've done a lot of this myself in the past when I was growing up as a leader, and I felt very alone because I didn't have anyone to help me. I felt isolated. I was busy as anything, taking on other people's work that I shouldn't have done. This was quite early on in my career. I moved into a new culture, which I took time to understand, but I didn't realize how long it would take. Now, I'm quite a fast moving person, quite directive. I just had to slow down by at least 50%. That felt really uncomfortable to me because I like to achieve, I like to move forward, but I had to put myself in the place where my team members were. And even though my intentions were good, my values were sound, I had to change, I had to adapt. So I've been through it, and some of this for some of you, this might all sound familiar, and we want happiness and progress for our teams. So in order to do that, we need to understand our team, diagnose, we need a plan, and then we need to act. And it doesn't take long. It might feel like, oh, it's a lot of time out of my workday, but imagine the time that you're using now or wasting now that is really focused on trying some of these techniques that aren't working, or ignoring the problem, or there's some conflicts coming up. I've worked with people where it's just taken the time, the energy, and the resources to do it. It doesn't have to be that way. Within a matter of weeks, a lot of this can be resolved, and then you can have a plan and then an ongoing plan, which is what I help you with for your specific situation to help lead you to success. So here are some more clients where I've helped them in the past, where they've had new team members, where, for example, a client in construction that was coming into a new team. Now, they were very diverse in terms of their culture, all based in the UK, but based in Ireland as well. And they had very different lifestyles, different cultural preferences. And whilst this person was a fantastic leader, had all the right intentions, it's like, I can't get them to do this. I can't get them to do that. They're not really doing this, they're not really doing that, but there were some issues underneath that needed to be uncovered and some conversations that needed to be held. What I did in that case was did a diagnosis piece and then gave him the tools to go and have those conversations, for him to do that by himself, and then we would catch up in regular sessions. So the plan can look very different depending on your unique needs. So as I mentioned, we've got a 3-step process, and I really want to help you so that you don't have to go through what I went through in terms of the anguish, scratching my head, thinking, how do I do something differently? I've tried all these different things and they haven't worked. And I want to help you and your team grow together, and to really help you embrace different cultures, understand different cultures, and make that part of your team culture. It's all very well that we say it as organisations, that we see it written, that we have general training courses, but sometimes we need a very specific plan to get to where we need to be. So as I mentioned at the beginning, please feel free to book a call if you would like to discuss your unique situation. I will give you some objective guidance, some objective pointers. I can even help you with a plan, or to go into more details about the 3 steps I've shared with you today. I'm not going to judge, I'm not going to criticise. We're all learning and the world is changing. So I've got some slots available until the end of the year. So if you'd like to book a call in confidence to discuss your unique challenges, then please follow the link that's in the slide and in the chat. Remember, three simple steps to break this down for you: diagnose, plan, and grow. The skills you learn through coaching will last with you forever. They will help you personally, they will help you professionally. I've seen it many times before. Thanks, Sarah. Not only did you improve my career, but my marriage is better. So I have had that feedback, and we can really break things down for you so it doesn't feel overwhelming. I can go off and do a lot of the diagnosis work so you don't have to, but we will meet together, break it down, and find the right way for you to move forward and build that culture of cultural sensitivity, of including people, of being cognizant of diverse feedbacks, personality styles, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, the cultures, the norms, etc. So remember that we need to listen, we need to face our fears, and we need to embrace the transformation, because these skills, as I mentioned in the previous slide, will last with you a lifetime, and then you'll be ready for the next stage of your growth in your career. Any coaching you have requires an open mindset and motivation, and if you've got that and a little bit of time, and you're willing to adapt, to learn, to grow, you're well on the path to being a really great leader. If you're closed-minded and you're not willing to learn, and you're hoping it's going to go away, and you're not prepared to listen, which I'm sure you're not, but I have seen that, and you feel that you need to have all the answers, then you really need to adapt your mindset into a more flexible one, but I don't believe that's you. So this is some of the offerings, just a summary here of what I can offer. in terms of diagnosing, having those team maps, having those plans. These are some of the other facets I bring into my programs. We can have one-to-one sessions as a leader. If you're a leader and you would like to do it on a one-to-one basis, that's fine. We can do that over a couple of months. We can bring in group sessions if you need to. If you're in a situation where you feel, I've got a question here and I'm a bit sensitive towards it, I don't know how to approach it, my clients can always access me via WhatsApp for urgent help. I keep a tracker and a plan all along the way so that you can see this is what we've covered. These are the headlines of the feedback. This is your team and cultural map. And I will give you a summary document at the end, and I will keep a tracker throughout our work together for you to reflect upon. What did we discuss? What were the actions? What were the resources that I gave you? You'll have a very clear roadmap to success within a matter of weeks or even a couple of months. Thank you so much for being here today. Again, here's the link to my call. And as a thank you for joining and registering for this webinar, I'll send you a recording of this presentation today, of this workshop, and I'm going to send you a free checklist that gives you some starters for 10 about how to become a more diverse leader. How can you bring in diversity into your team? So thanks again, and any questions, any queries, feel free to drop me a line, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.